My name is Kaylee, and as most of you by now will know, I am immensely intrigued by fossilized footprints. I have made the joke in the past that I have a fossilized footprints fetish. Not a foot fetish. Feet are absolutely disgusting to me, but fossilized footprints are incredible. Especially because fossilized footprints can tell us quite a lot about the makers of the footprints. Their approximate age, the activity they were doing while they were making the prints, and if they were carrying something or someone, and a lot of other things. So today I'm going to tell you all about the recently discovered Neanderthal footprints at two separate locations on the southwestern coast of Portugal that date back to 82,000 and 78,000 years ago. And these are considered to be the first two hominin track sites found in the southwesternmost region of Europe. This video is sponsored by Beastlord, but as always, more on the sponsor later in the video. But Kaylee, how can they possibly know how old these fossilized footprints actually are? I often get this question in my comments whenever I talk about fossilized footprints, because people don't really understand how these footprints are dated. So to determine the age of fossilized footprints, the researchers use optical stimulated luminescence dating techniques, and I will quickly explain how that works. Optical stimulated luminescence dating is used to determine the time since a material, usually sediment, was last exposed to daylight. So when certain minerals, like for instance quartz, are exposed to daylight, they store energy from background radiation when they get buried. And when these minerals are then illuminated with light, they release the previously stored energy as light. And by measuring that light signal, the luminescence, the time since burial can be calculated. And this is a really great dating technique to uncover the age of fossilized footprints, which are usually located in a sandy area near a body of water. And we all know that sand contains a lot of minerals, especially a whole lot of quartz. Okay, imagine this, a new continent, untouched and wild, where lions, wolves, eagles and even dinosaurs roam under the same sky. In Beastlord: The New Land, you're not just playing, you're leading an entire animal tribe into the unknown. You gather, build, evolve and fight for survival while the world around you shifts with real-time challenges. And yes, alliances matter. Sometimes your greatest enemy is the jungle itself. In Chapter 7, your tribe reaches a turning point. You have to decide between three classes to determine the future of your territory. You can choose between Collector, Invader, and Developer. I chose the Collector because it offers me powerful beasts in exchange for rare resources. And these beasts often have higher base stats. And if your strategy in the game leans like mine towards beast combat superiority, this choice fits perfectly. You can summon beasts like the White Tiger, a swift and high damage predator known for powerful pounce attacks, strong critical hits and excellent mobility, making it a top-tier offensive beast for ambush tactics. But if you prefer more raw impact style battles, you hope to top summon the Indian Rhino, which is a heavy armor plated charger. It uses its massive horn for devastating charge attacks that break enemy lines and disrupts formations while soaking damage for your team. But you might prefer a more stealth-oriented assassin beast, like the Canadian Lynx. It excels at ambushing with silent pounces, built for precision strikes. Its keen senses boost detection and tracking, making it ideal for scouting and eliminating isolate attacks. But whatever animal you summon, they look awesome and they all have their individual value for your team as a whole, and you can easily switch tactics. I prefer the feline beasts, but that's because I always have a feline preference. But do let me know your preferred beast. And if you want to build your own beast empire, claim territory, and collect over 100 species, including literal T-Rexes, go download Beastlord: The New Land and use code BL777. It's free, it's chaotic in the best. So optical stimulated luminescence dating is one of the most precise dating techniques that we can use to determine the age of fossilized footprints. And that's why it's so often used for it. And you may wonder how the researchers were able to determine that the footprints were left by Neanderthals and not by Homo sapiens, you know, us modern humans. And their answer to that is very simple. It is impossible to distinguish between Neanderthal and Homo sapiens footprints, as these two human species are extremely similar. But the age of the footprints tell us that they would have to have been made by Neanderthals, because approximately 80,000 years ago, they were the only human species living in the southwest of Europe. So to the researchers, there is absolutely no doubt that these fossilized footprints were made by Neanderthals, as they are confident in the results of the optical stimulated luminescence dating. So now that we know all that, it's time to look into the footprints. So the footprints were discovered at two coastal sites, located approximately 36 kilometers apart, which equates to roughly 22 miles. And they were found in the Algarve region in Portugal, and the footprints were left by adults, children, and even toddlers. So first, let's take a quick look at the site with the oldest discovered footprint, as they have only found one single footprint here, and thus the information surrounding this one footprint is kinda limited. So this footprint was discovered at Praia do Telheiro, near the surfing hotspot of Sagres. It seems like the footprint was left behind by a teenager or possibly a young woman, and this footprint dates back to 82,000 years ago. Again, this date came up by the research of the optical stimulated luminescence dating techniques. So unfortunately, there are no additional footprints discovered at this particular location. But this one footprint does confirm the presence of Neanderthals and the fact that they inhabited these coastal areas in Portugal during the Pleistocene. So while this one footprint is the oldest discovered fossilized footprint in the country of Portugal and in the entirety of the southwest of Europe, this is not the biggest discovery when it comes to these recently found fossilized footprints here in Portugal. So just 36 kilometers north of the discovered lone footprint found at Praia do Telheiro is where the researchers discovered more footprints. In fact, they discovered 5 separate trackways with a total of 26 footprints. So the researchers discovered these 26 footprints at Praia do Monte Clerigo, and the researchers were able to determine that the 5 trackways were left by 3 separate individuals. One of these individuals was an adult male. He seemed to have ascended the cliff dune twice and descending the cliff dune once. So it seems like this one male individual left 3 trackways here at the cliff dune. The other 2 trackways seem to have been made by children, one of them between 7 and 9 years of age, and the other trackway seemed to have been made by a toddler, probably younger than 2 years old. And then the researchers stumbled upon the fossilized footprints of a red deer here on the same dune. And thus the researchers concluded that the Neanderthal family that left the footprints were most likely hunting the deer, using the undulating landscape to attempt to sneak up on their prey. Red deer seem to have a tendency to jump into the sea and drown when they were stalked, and the Neanderthals may have used the sandy terrain to slow down their prey in their attempt to escape their spears. So this dune landscape here on the southwest coast of Portugal would have been perfect for ambush hunting strategies, which was something that the Neanderthals seemed to have specialized in. And because it seems to have been a family that was hunting on this dune, the researchers have speculated that there may have been a Neanderthal campsite nearby. Especially when we consider the footprints of the less than 2-year-old toddler among the adult and 7 to 9-year-old child, showing that the Neanderthal children were most likely present on the day-to-day activities. So they were probably learning these skills from a very, very young age. These newly discovered footprints also show us that Neanderthals lived near the sea and other coastal regions, taking advantage of all the resources that the area would have offered. The diet of these Neanderthals in this area seemed to have mostly consisted of red deer, horses, aurochs, and hares, but they also seem to have consumed quite a bit of shellfish and fish, which indicates that they were very flexible in their feeding strategies, so they were probably adapting to what they found in each location. And this study adds new pieces to the puzzle of Neanderthal life and culture and reinforces once again the idea that they were far more adaptable and intelligent than previously thought. As we all know, the sea levels have risen quite a bit since the last ice age, and thus these footprints are direct evidence of the presence of Neanderthals at a time when sea levels were much lower and coasts were more exposed. And the rise in sea levels after the last glaciation has made the preservation and detection of Neanderthal evidence on the Atlantic coast a lot more difficult, and thus each new discovery is especially valuable. These fossilized footprints revealed to us that Neanderthal families may have hunted together without an age limit for participation. Neanderthals seem to have thrived in these sort of environments, taking advantage of a varied diet and the predictable available resources. So all of this leaves me with one question. What do you think of these discovered fossilized Neanderthal footprints in Portugal? Let me know in the comments down below. So yeah, I might have an actual fossilized footprints fetish. Not a foot fetish because feet are nasty, but fossilized feet are awesome. In this video, we are going to take a look at the currently oldest known fossilized human footprints, dating back to, according to one of the articles reporting on this online, whopping 115,000 years ago, that were discovered in Saudi Arabia back in 2017. But Kaylee, why are you talking about this now? It's been years since the discovery was made, and it's been years since the publication about this discovery was published, as that happened in September of 2020. Well, I stumbled upon numerous articles reporting on the oldest ever discovered human footprints in Saudi Arabia, and that these footprints shouldn't be there, and that the archaeologists are stunned to find them there, even though there's actually no good reason for these articles to suddenly pop up at this point in time and making such claims about the archaeologists. Because honestly, there is no new information that has come to light since this paper about this discovery was published in 2020. But you know me. I love me some good fossilized human footprints, and therefore I have decided to make this video because I've not yet talked about this particular discovery on my channel yet. I personally just love talking about fossilized footprints, and I very much enjoy seeing my fossilized footprints playlist on the channel grow. So that's honestly the only reason why I'm making this video. The footprints themselves are incredible, and no, archaeologists are not stunned. It's all bullshit, it's all clickbait, and articles really need to stop putting out that shit, seriously. These footprints have been thoroughly analyzed and dated to approximately 115,000 years ago, and the researchers are of the belief that this discovery could potentially change the Homo sapiens out of Africa migration story. But first, let's take a look at the location where the footprints were discovered and what the researchers found there. The fossilized tracks were spotted in 2017 by a group of archaeologists at an ancient dried-up lakebed, now nicknamed the Trace in Arabic. This dried-up lakebed is situated in the Alathar Paleo Lake deposit, which is located deep in the Nafut Desert, which is located in the northwestern part of Saudi Arabia. The footprints at the dried-up Alathar lakebed belong to a variety of prehistoric animals and humans. I would like to quickly mention something that annoyed me a lot while I was reading the articles. There is one mistake I see all the articles reporting on about this discovery, and that is the fact that they all state that Homo sapiens first evolved in Africa 200,000 years ago. This claim is false, as it has been widely known by now that Homo sapiens evolved in Africa at least 300,000 years ago, as the currently oldest known Homo sapiens fossils discovered at Jebel Irut in Morocco date back to 300,000 years ago. Honestly, I wish that these news outlets would actually research the topics that they are reporting on, because this isn't the first blatantly obvious mistake that I've discovered in articles reporting on new archaeological discoveries in the past few months. Mistakes like these should be corrected, and honestly, they shouldn't even be made in the first place, because a 2-second Google search would show you immediately when Homo sapiens first evolved in Africa, which is at least 300,000 years ago. Okay, so mini rant about my pet peeves. With news articles out of the way, it's time to look at the discovered footprints and how they were analyzed. Among the various animal footprints, the researchers identified 7 footprints belonging to hominins. So given the archaeological and fossil evidence for the spread of Homo sapiens into the Levant area and Arabia between 130,000 and 80,000 years ago, and the absence of Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals, in the area around that time, the researchers are therefore confidently arguing that these footprints were left by Homo sapiens, which would make them the oldest currently known Homo sapiens footprints ever discovered. The Arabian Peninsula is situated between Africa and Asia, and it has acted as a land bridge allowing humans and animals to migrate between the continents numerous times throughout history. It seems like the area of the Nafut Desert, where the Alathar Paleo Lake was situated, was a busy spot around 100,000 years ago, as the researchers have noted that these fossilized footprints left by the various animals and humans were most likely generated in a short period of time, as seen by their similar state of preservation. To explain this a little bit better and to clarify this, an experimental study of modern human footprints in mud flats found that fine details were lost within 2 days and that footprints were rendered unrecognizable within 4 days. And similar observations have been made for other non-human mammal tracks in similar circumstances. So therefore it's believed that in a short time span, these various animals and humans have been at this lake, possibly even at the same time. And since there's no evidence of hunting activity from the humans at this location in the area, meaning that the animal bones discovered in the area around this site bared no tool or knife marks, it seems like they all came to this lake to drink the water. It would have been a perfect hunting spot, but apparently they didn't use it as such. These footprints discovered here at the Alathar Paleo Lake offer us a snapshot of what the ecosystem and human presence in this area looked like some, 115,000 years ago. So the scientists have identified various animal footprints belonging to elephants, camels, and antelope, which paints a picture of a lush environment, which is vastly different from the environment in that particular area that we see today, with its, dried up desert climate. One question that comes to mind according to the researchers is, why weren't the human footprint tracks covered by other groups? It's not a question that I would have, but it's a question that they had. So one theory that they suggested to answer this question is that these humans may have been the last ones to have migrated through this particular area before the temperate climate was obliterated by the Ice Age. I personally don't know if that was the case or not, and I'm personally not someone who speculates about things like this, so I'll leave this educated guess to the experts. So yeah, I might have an actual fossilized footprints fetish. Not a foot fetish because feet are nasty, but fossilized feet are awesome. So there we have it. Fossilized footprints in the modern-day northwestern part of Saudi Arabia, left by humans, most likely Homo sapiens and not Neanderthals, possibly being the currently oldest discovered Homo sapiens footprints in the world. I dislike it when news articles come out about discoveries made years ago without any new information giving them a reason to make a new article about it. They're just regurgitating old news for clicks. And it's annoying. What do you think of this discovery? But also, what do you think of news outlets making such blatant mistakes in their articles? And what do you think about regurgitating old news and presenting it as new? Please let me know in the comments down below. An incredible team of scientists, led by a team of researchers from the University of Tübingen and the Senckenberg Center for Human Evolution and Paleoenvironment, have found the oldest fossilized human footprints in Germany, dating back to approximately 300,000 years ago. Yes, it's time to talk about more fossilized footprints. This is a mesmerizing and astonishing archaeological revelation that is by far the oldest evidence of human footprints in Germany, and possibly even in the entirety of Europe. In this video, I'm going to tell you all about this latest discovery, the oldest ever discovered footprints in Germany, dating back to 300,000 years. This is not the first time I talk about fossilized footprints, so if you haven't seen my previous videos on fossilized footprints yet, I'll put them in a separate playlist on the channel, and I'll put that playlist as a card in the upper right corner. So a very good thing that we all need to remember when we talk about fossilized footprints is that they are always found along shorelines, places with water, no matter if those are salty or freshwater shores. The conditions need to be absolutely perfect for footprints to fossilize. Usually the footprints of an animal or hominin got filled with sand and eventually hardened to rock, or the footprint sank so deep into the surface that it created a print well below the surface that was undisturbed for long enough to harden. But how were these German footprints found and confirmed to be human? And who was the human species that left these prints? Well, let's find out, shall we? But first, Let's take a look at the location of the discovery. As I have often said before, the location can play a very key role in our understanding of the ancient world, and the location of this discovery is really quite north and far from the equator compared to similar finds, like the fossilized footprints that we found in Spain, nearly as old as these ones. So the footprints were found at the Paleolithic site complex near Schöningen in the Helmstedt district of Lower Saxony in Germany. So the archaeological site of Schöningen is part of a brown coal mine area, which is located in the northern foreland of the Harz Mountains. The Harz Mountains has a length of 110 kilometers, which is approximately 68 miles, and a width of 35 kilometers, which is approximately 22 miles. So the area of the Harz Mountains was inhabited by Homo erectus between 700,000 to 350,000 years ago. After that, the area was inhabited by Homo heidelbergensis until around 250,000 years ago, when, the Neanderthal started to occupy the area until approximately 40,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens, us modern humans, started to move into the area and Neanderthal slowly disappeared from the face of the earth. I have videos on that as well, so for those who haven't seen those, go watch. The Schöningen Paleolithic site complex is most famous for the discovery of the Schöningen spears, which are 10 spears discovered at the site between 1994 and 1999 that date back to between 337,000 and 300,000 years ago. And they are credited to have been made by Homo heidelbergensis. At the Schöningen Paleolithic site complex, the archaeologists have not yet found any hominin remains, but based on the technological features of the lithic industry found at the site, the researchers assume that a late form of Homo heidelbergensis that was at the threshold of transitioning into Homo neanderthalensis, otherwise known as Neanderthals, occupied the area. I've actually made a quite extensive video on the species of Homo heidelbergensis on my channel. If you haven't seen that video yet, or if you would like to refresh the information in your mind, click the card in the upper right corner to go straight to the video. So now that you know a little bit about the location of where the footprints were discovered, it's time to look into how they were found. But before I go into that, I feel like I need to disclose some very important information about the Schöningen Paleolithic site complex. So the area of the Schöningen Paleolithic site complex was extensively exploited by an open-cast lignite mine, which has removed the up to 45-meter thick Holocene and Pleistocene deposits over a very large area to follow the lignite streams, reaching a total depth of approximately 140 meters. That's a lot. Archaeological research teams supervised the excavations, discovering the evidence of human occupation dating from the Lower Paleolithic all the way up to the Iron Age. These research teams were from the Lower Saxony State Service for Cultural Heritage and later on from the University of Tübingen. So now that you know this bit of very important information, it's time to look into when the footprints were first discovered. So all the way back in the summer of 1994, the archaeological team explored the area of Schöningen Paleolithic site complex known as Schö 13I. This is a 3,900 square meter block of sediment made from 2 layers that they saved from the mining activities on the edge of the open-cast lignite mine. They of course saved this block of sediment for scientific investigations. Who would have thunk? Researchers identified 2 layers in this block. Layer 1 was formed by a sandy deposit that was covered by a dried up lake bed known as Layer 2. So Layer 1 after exploration was interpreted as an interglacial lake bank deposit that was formed during a boreal pine forest phase, and this is where the researchers found lithic artifacts. They found the remains of elephants, horses, red deer and bovids, to name a few. So the team also investigated Layer 2 that laid above Layer 1 by 1.5 meters, and it was here that they came across a surface from the Paleolithic, approximately 65 square meters, that preserved dozens of fossil footprints. The footprints were then explored and documented, but they were never extensively researched or studied, and the find itself remained, honestly, mainly unpublished, aside from few short reports in 2007 and 2015. In 2011, new profiles at the end of the slope of the open cast mine provided the researchers the opportunity to re-examine and document the site. Another area at the edge of the open cast mine was first explored between 2002 and 2007, and this reached an area of 450 square meters and revealed 520 finds, including large animal remains, few lithic artifacts, and burnt and charred wood. But more recently, between 2018 and 2020, an area adjacent to this has been explored and revealed a mud layer with a 43 square meter paleo surface, where more footprints were unearthed. So now you know the story of how these footprints were first discovered, including the discovery of the importance of the area, the fact that it used to be a lignite mine, and that archaeologists have tried to save as much of the surface areas of the mine that showed archaeological deposits. So the both mentioned locations of footprints are of importance here, as both of the sites at Schöningen were investigated in full detail. Dr. Altamura from the Senckenberg Center for Human Evolution and Paleoenvironment at the University of, Tübingen, and his team uncovered 3 tracks that looked a lot like hominin footprints. These incredible indentations that have been dated to have been made around 300,000 years ago are the oldest ever discovered direct evidence of human occupation in Germany, and they shed light on our distant ancestors, Homo heidelbergensis. Of course, 3 tracks doesn't mean 3 footprints, but 3 separate sets of footprints created by 3 different individuals. 2 of the tracks seem to have been made by young individuals, children, teens, that kind of age, that walked along the shores of an ancient lake that used to be at this location. So based on the tracks and the fact that 2 of the tracks were made by younger individuals, the researchers suggest that this was more likely a family outing instead of a group of adult hunters. The non-human tracks in the area were important as well, according to Dr. Altamura. A series of elephant tracks were uncovered and measured at the incredible length of 55 centimeters, and fragments of wood were discovered in these fossilized elephant footprints that were pressed down into the soft soil by the elephants when the tracks were made. And a single track from a Pleistocene species of rhinoceros was found for the first time in Europe here at Schöningen in Germany as well. So why do the researchers believe that the hominin footprints were left behind by individuals from the Homo heidelbergensis species? Well, the answer to that is actually quite simple. Homo heidelbergensis was one of the first species of humans that started to live in cold weather, probably the first species to build shelters made from wood and rock, and they are the species that fits the timeline for the date these footprints were created, as Neanderthals haven't been recorded to occupy the area this long ago. Homo heidelbergensis is actually one of the more successful and widespread early human species, as they occupied diverse habitats and environments across 3 continents. During their time on the planet, they experienced changes in climate, vegetation, and fauna, while at the same time they faced challenges from diseases, predators, and competitions from other human species and groups. This discovery in Germany provides us a rare glimpse into their daily life, as they coexisted with large mammals in a prehistoric landscape. They show us how our ancestors adapted to their environment and how they interacted with other animals. And they remind us of our connection to our long and extreme complex evolutionary history. I hope that the area of Schöningen keeps being explored and researched, as I feel like it has a lot hidden from us that we will uncover in the future. So there's only one question left for me to ask. What do you think about this latest discovery? Let me know in the comments down below. If you've been watching me for a while, then you know that I do love me some fossilized footprints. This is not really a secret, because, you know, I covered the oldest human footprints in North America that were found at White Sands in New Mexico, and they date back to 23,000 years ago. I also recently covered the 12,000-year-old human footprints in Utah. I also covered the oldest ever discovered pre-human footprints that were found on a beach at Trachilos on the island of Crete in the country of Greece. And of course, I covered the Laetoli footprints at the Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, which is in Africa. And yes, friends, today is yet another amazing day because today I'm covering fossilized footprints, as a new paper was released by Nature on October 19th, 2022, about the new date of the footprints that were discovered at Matalascañas beach in southwestern Spain. And in this video I'm going to tell you everything there is to know about these hominin footprints. As always, I'm going to start at the location of the discovery. Locations hold key information, and it's important to understand where these footprints were discovered. The footprints were discovered on a beach in the area known as the El Asperello Cliff, which is close to Matalascañas in the Doñana National Park in southwestern Spain. The discovery of the footprints itself occurred back in June 2020, and back then it was believed that the footprints had to be at least 106,000 years old. It was even considered to be one of the most important discoveries of that year in the archaeological community. 106,000 years ago would fall in the late Pleistocene. During this time, Neanderthals were the only living human species in Europe. When they first discovered it, the site had 87 hominin footprints in total. Like I said, that was when it was first discovered. Of these 87 prints, 31 were complete, and these complete prints were then measured, and they ranged from 14 to 29 centimeters in length. I'll put on screen what that is for the American viewers or other people that don't use the metric system. This meant that the individuals leaving these prints on the sand were ranging between 104 to 188 centimeters in height. Because there is such a wide range in the length of the individual footprints, the researchers concluded that the prints were made by a group of hominins, with an average of more kids and teens than adults. So the discovery of that suggests that the group of individuals leaving the footprints were a social group, most likely from the same community, with a couple adults overseeing the younger ones. It's very straightforward. So because of the fact that the prints were initially dated to approximately 106,000 years ago, it was thought that they were probably left by the Neanderthals, as, you know, they were considered to be the only human species living in Europe around that time. So it has to do with the age range and the anatomical characteristics of the footprints, as the anatomical characteristics of these footprints show that it's at least from the Neanderthal lineage. But yeah, mostly the age resulted in this idea because, like I said, 106,000 years ago, Neanderthals were the only species of human living in Europe. So that's a quick conclusion. But thankfully, science and its research usually doesn't stop after an initial discovery. And, you know, the use of the dating methods in the original discovery. So usually they like to verify and confirm dates by taking a new sample and doing the entire process again, sometimes with the use of new techniques as well. This is extremely important in my opinion. So they went back and a new sample was taken at the Asperello Cliff area. And a new technique was used. It's called optically stimulated luminescence. The researchers then determined an entirely new date for the Matalascañas footprints, which was now pushed back to 295,800 years ago. Almost 200,000 years older. This new date was then verified and confirmed by the researchers, and they were extremely impressed by the results. It was already seen as a major discovery, but now it's even a crucial discovery for understanding human occupation in Europe during the Pleistocene. The Middle Pleistocene, that is. The prints were most likely left by individuals from the Neanderthal lineage, which doesn't necessarily mean that the prints were left by Neanderthals themselves, but they could have been left by the ancestors of the Neanderthals, who we know to be Homo heidelbergensis, who was also living in Europe 295,800 years ago. So we know that 295,800 years ago, Homo heidelbergensis and Homo neanderthalensis both lived on the European continent. So they could very well both be the ones that left these footprints. I actually recently made a video on Homo heidelbergensis and the possibility that this species was the very last common ancestor of both the Neanderthals and us Homo sapiens sapiens, as this could very well be the case. If you haven't watched that video, I will put it as a card in the upper right corner, and I will put a link in the description down below as well, so you can watch that. It's a good video. Homo heidelbergensis is actually very often referred to as a pre-Neanderthal, and in some rare cases this species is referred to as archaic Homo sapiens, which I personally don't agree with because we already had archaic Homo sapiens dating back to 300,000 years ago at Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, and they were most definitely not Homo heidelbergensis. So yeah, no, I don't like that name for them. So we know that both the Homo neanderthalensis and Homo heidelbergensis species were human species, as they were from the Homo genus. Homo meaning human. So stop telling me in the comments that I can't use the word Homo. It's really annoying at this point. The new dates show that human species were roaming in the Iberian Peninsula approximately 200,000 years earlier than previously thought. This is because we don't know much about the Middle Pleistocene. But that's not even the latest bit of news. Initially, the researchers discovered 87 footprints, but now, more than 2 years later, they have discovered more than 300 footprints so far that lead towards animal tracks. So the story and the plot just thickens. This suggests that the individuals might have been hunting animals on the day that they left their footprints in the perfect conditions for their footprints to become fossilized. So the area of the Iberian Peninsula would actually have been one of the best locations for human species to survive during this time, when major glaciation occurred in Europe during the Middle Pleistocene. Southern Europe was the best bet for survival. And these species apparently knew that because they were there and they were living, surviving. Another thing to note is that when these footprints were made, a landmass known as Doggerland was still very much intact in Northwest Europe. I have created quite an extensive video on Doggerland last year. It's actually nearly a mini documentary, and it shows how this landmass eventually disappeared and the remnants that we can find of it up until this day. And if you haven't seen that video, I'll also put it as a card in the upper right corner, and I'll put a link in the description down below as well. The Matsalaskanya's footprints, after they've been researched again and dated again, are now even more valuable to our understanding of human species in Europe due to the fact that they originate from the Middle Pleistocene, which is a very poorly documented time in Europe due to the fact that deposits with footprints are very scarce. Evidence of human occupation during this time is very, very scarce. So, I mean, these footprints could even hold more information to us that we haven't uncovered yet. So, the question that I want to ask you is, which species do you think left these footprints? Do you think it was Homo heidelbergensis or Homo neanderthalensis, or the Neanderthals? Let me know in the comments down below, and yeah, I'd like to have some back and forths with you guys. Ghost tracks. I've mentioned this phenomenon earlier in my Footprints at White Sands in New Mexico video that I posted last October, in October 2021. Well, if you forgot or this is the first time that you're watching me, I'll explain. Ghost tracks are tracks that appear very suddenly when the conditions are perfectly moist for them to show up. And once conditions change and it becomes either more dry or too wet, these tracks will once again disappear. So ghost tracks, they only appear under certain perfect conditions. This was actually the case with the footprints at White Sands in New Mexico in the Tularosa Basin. And now another case of ghost tracks are discovered in the United States, this time in Utah. And I'm going to tell you everything that I could find out about the new discovered human footprints in Utah. So to start this particular video, I would first like to mention how I first got word of this new discovery, as it actually wasn't from the papers. So I'm a member of the Snake Bros Discord community, and in the anthropology chat on July 21st, 2 TikTok videos were posted by members from a person named Elizabeth, who was the creator behind the TikTok account Australopithecus. She publicly announced that there had been a game-changing discovery made on the salt flats of the Air Force's Utah Testing and Training Range. In that area, she made use of hashtags like Ice Age, Breaking News, Discovery, Archaeology, Science, Humanity, and Archaeology on TikTok. So yeah, judging by these hashtags, I think she really wanted those videos to be found. It's really simple as that, although she did mention in the second TikTok that she didn't want to cross the Air Force and that she didn't want to actually reveal anything. But she did mention the location and the fact that there was a new discovery. So yeah, she wanted to be found. And of course, as I could expect from the people frequenting the Snake Bros Discord community, the people there try to uncover as much as possible. What else do you expect from people who are interested in history? So in 2016, a paper had come out about 12,000-year-old tobacco seeds being found on the same salt flats in nearly the same area. Later on that same day, Elizabeth, or Australopithecus, deleted her 2 videos about this new discovery without any explanation or anything that was heard from her until the 25th of July, which was a whole 4 days later. Apparently people were asking her about her health, her well-being, how there was no announcement on Friday the 22nd when she had said that there would be, as it probably was delayed because she opened her mouth, which isn't really what you're supposed to do. I would like to mention that in the scientific community, whether that's archaeology or anthropology or even astronomy, you never ever mention anything about a new discovery until you've gone through all the proper channels. You've taken the proper steps, it's peer-reviewed, studied, and published. Then you can open your mouth. I know this because my sister was publishing something and I had to zip it for how long? I think from like May 2021 until what was it? January, February 2022? Nearly a year. Eventually on the 26th of July, the news broke officially about this new discovery in Utah. The footprints that are the subject of today's video. But yeah, that's how I found out about it. And yeah, keep your mouth shut until it's okay to talk. It's time to look at the location where this discovery was made. The Hill Air Force Base is located in the northwest of Utah in County Davis. And the Utah Test and Training Range is located, again, in the northwest of the state of Utah and in eastern Nevada in the United States of America. This area is actually very well known as the Great Salt Lake Desert. And as the name already points out, this area used to be a large lake that is now dry. The area receives less than 200 millimeters, which equates to approximately 8 inches of precipitation annually. That's not much. Once the rain evaporates, the salt crust that covers the desert reforms again, and this happens annually as well. It's nice to already know what's gonna happen in a year, in a place. This year, when Urban and Darren Duke of the Far Western Anthropological Research Group were driving to an archaeological site at Utah's testing and training range, they spotted what seemed to have been ghost tracks. So they immediately stopped the vehicle to take a closer look. And without a doubt, Urban knew what he was looking at: human footprints, similar to those that he studied at White Sands National Park in New Mexico that, like I mentioned earlier, I covered in the video last October. Again, the thumbnail. It's a good video, actually. It's not long, but it gives you everything that you want to know and some background information on all of it. So the next day they returned to the site and they started to document the prints. That's what you usually do. You study it. They started conducting a ground-penetrating radar survey on one of the two visible trackways. This method has actually been refined since Urban was imaging the footprints at White Sands in New Mexico, which came in pretty handy during this particular research. Like, you've done this not even a year ago and you can do it again, and now you can perfect it even more. Urban said that just like at White Sands, where the visible ghost tracks were only a small part of the story, the radar detected many more invisible prints here in the salt flats of Utah. So Duke excavated some of the prints. He confirmed that they were left by people walking bare feet and that they were previously unseen, which is why it's a new discovery, even though they've been there all this time. So a total of 88 footprints have been discovered here at this location. They belong to adults and children, and these prints could actually offer us quite a bit more insight into the lives of the people living in the Pleistocene in this part of the world. So based on the excavations of numerous of these footprints, evidence have been found that adults were walking around with children in the age range of 5 to 12 years. What seemed to have happened is that they were walking in shallow water when they were walking there at the time, where the sand rapidly filled in the left behind prints, just like you would see happen on a beach, for instance. But the main difference between a beach and what normally happens with the prints being filled in and this exact location was that there was a layer of mud beneath the sand that actually kept the prints intact after they had been filled in. So this part of the United States hasn't seen wetland conditions for at least over 10,000 years that could have produced the trails of the footprints in this remote area of the Great Salt Lake Desert. Therefore, we already know that the prints are unable to be any younger than 10,000 years. But the prints are more likely more than 12,000 years old, as the conditions before 12,000 years ago would enable these prints to be left behind a lot easier. As you can imagine, additional research is being conducted to confirm the new discovery and to figure out more. Duke is actually one of the researchers that discovered two open-air hearth sites, and at one of these hearth sites he discovered the earliest tobacco use dating back to approximately 12,000 years ago, which is in the same area of the Great Salt Lake Desert, and it's actually just half a mile away from this latest discovery. And the people in the Snake Bros Discord that found this, good job, because he's actually affiliated with that. So after the discovery at White Sands, New Mexico, last October, it was actually questioned if more sites like it could exist in the United States or anywhere else in the world, and if ground-penetrating radar could effectively image the footprints at other locations than White Sands, as it was a very new application of this technology. And it seems like the answer to both these questions is without a doubt yes. Which is great news because, oh my god, I want to learn more about the people leaving behind these footprints, and I want to find more footprints wherever, anywhere in the world. Of course, the new discovery in Utah isn't as old and as big and therefore as grand as the discovery at White Sands, but it does help us in understanding more about the people living in the Pleistocene, and we should understand more about the people living in the Pleistocene, because, I mean, the last ice age wasn't very kind to us, and, you know, a lot happened. The researchers also believe that there is more to be found in the area, and I personally feel like they are absolutely right. I cannot imagine nothing else to be found there at all, so it's just waiting for them to find something else. We need to investigate the areas of the dried up lakes in the United States, as I personally feel like a lot more of these sites are hidden in plain sight. But you know, only time will tell, and until then we will have to sit on the edges of our seats and hope that they discover more. So yeah, this was the new footprints that have been discovered in Utah. These are not the dinosaur prints in Utah. That's a whole other story with like them being damaged and no one really saying sorry. That was a whole thing a while ago. I might make a video on that one day, but that wasn't the subject of today's video. We've already covered that and you've got all the information that I could find. As most of you guys watching me for a while will know, is that I've covered some of the oldest human and pre-human footprints on the channel a couple times now. I spoke about the footprints of modern humans that were discovered in Hasbro, England in my Doggerland video. I spoke about the oldest known footprints ever found in North America, which was in White Sands, New Mexico. And last month I had the privilege of interviewing Professor Per Ahlberg from the Uppsala University about the discovery of the oldest known pre-human footprints that were found near Trachilos on the island of Crete in Greece. And these footprints dated from 6 million years ago. Today we're going to look into the information behind the paper that was published in Nature yesterday on December 1st about the oldest hominin footprints that were discovered. And I will leave a link to that paper in the description down below and in the pinned comments. And I will also leave a link to the paper about the Trachilos footprints in the description down below and in the pinned comments. But without further ado, let's jump right in because we've got quite a bit to uncover. On Monday, December 1st, a paper was published by Nature, and this paper spoke about the oldest hominin footprints ever discovered. They were discovered at Laetoli in northern Tanzania. These footprints are estimated to be 3.6 million years old, and there are two separate trackways here at Laetoli site. These pre-human footprints at Laetoli were first discovered in 1976. In 1978, what's now known as Site G was discovered, but there was a second trackway discovered in 1976. This is known as Site A. These footprints at Site A were possibly attributed to a pre-human, but there was a possibility that they either belonged to an upright walking bear or chimpanzee. Site A was again located in 2019 after it had fallen into obscurity for a few decades and its importance was largely forgotten. They cleaned the trackway and by the use of 3D photogrammetry and laser scanning, they produced a digital archive. Using this digital archive, they compared the footprints at Laetoli with the footprints of black bears, chimpanzees, and modern humans. This research shows that the footprints mostly resemble those of modern humans and not bears nor chimps. To me personally, the footprints here discovered in Laetoli that you can see on the screen right here are really similar to the footprints found at Trachilos in Greece that you can see here. I mean, it's nearly the same. While reading the Nature article, the very first sentence struck me as quite odd, and the sentence goes as follows. Bipedal trackways that were discovered in 1978 at Laetoli Site G, Tanzania, and dated to 3.66 million years ago, are widely accepted as the oldest unequivocal evidence of obligate bipedalism in the human lineage. Not only does this article in Nature make this claim, but other articles actually double down on it, and they don't even use the careful words widely accepted, but they just outright claim that these footprints in Tanzania are the oldest discovered pre-human footprints. And to me this felt wrong because I have interviewed Professor Ahlberg about the oldest known footprints from a pre-human, And they were not found in Tanzania, and they were not 3.66 million years old. They were actually discovered near Trachilos on the island of Crete in Greece, and they were 6 million years old, and that's quite a difference. Because I felt that this statement was misleading, I contacted my sister who lives in Sweden, and I asked her if she could ask her boss, Professor Ahlberg, if he had a moment to spare for me, because I wanted to ask him personally about this paper and about this claim. And he agreed for a Zoom meeting that we share with you guys so that he can actually tell you himself. Because, I can tell you and that's all fine and dandy and we all like that, but I felt that he needed to be given the opportunity to tell everyone himself. So let's jump right into that.
Today I have Professor Ahlberg with me again. We spoke a while ago about the oldest discovered footprints in Trachilos, Crete. And on Monday, December 1st, there was an article in Nature about footprints at Laetoli in Tanzania. And this spoke about the fact that these footprints are the oldest pre-hominin footprints found in the world. This paper states that these footprints are 3.6 million years old. Can you explain why these footprints in Tanzania are widely accepted as the oldest evidence, while the footprints in Greece are discarded as being the oldest? Is there a reason the footprints in Greece aren't being taken as serious? And can you explain to the viewers what you believe?
Certainly. Okay. The first thing, thanks for inviting me back on, by the way. Very happy to be here again. The first thing I want to say is that the new footprints are actually a really interesting, really important discovery. Here's the story. Laetoli is really famous for one particular set of trackways. You will see one of those feet later on, which have been reproduced endlessly. But the fact of the matter is that there's a second adjacent track site at Laetoli, short distance away from the classic one, with rather different footprints. It was found already back in the 1970s, but the footprints were never published, and they have now been cleaned up and published. And very interesting they are, because they're really different from the other Laetoli prints.
Yeah.
They're certainly pre-human, as are the other Laetoli prints. There's no discussion about that. And it's certainly true that they are universally accepted as such. The relationship with the Trachilos footprints here is a little more problematic. I'll come back to that in a moment. But here's what I want to show you first of all. So I've made a little compound figure here. At the top, we have the best preserved of the new Laetoli prints taken here straight out of the McNutt et al. Paper that just came out. And down here, from my paper, Gierlinski et al. 2017, the best preserved of the Trachilos prints. And by the way, both of these are actually scans, surface scans, not photographs. Okay, in some ways they're more informative.
Yeah.
The thing you might see immediately that this is a rather similar looking feet. The thing that you should be aware of is that there's something a bit funny with this one. The toes are kind of twisted around clockwise compared to how they should be aligned. The big toe here looks as though this thing has been wearing inappropriate pointy-toed shoes all its life. And it's got bunions, and of course it hasn't. Barefoot early hominin. And you can also see how the ball here associated with the big toe is really drilled into the sediment. I think what's actually going on is that this individual is twisting, turning to the right during the step. And so you get a misalignment of the toes relative to the back part of the foot. I once tested this out with my own foot in a sandbox, and you can in fact replicate this effect. Yeah. Anyhow. So here is an outline of the foot. Now I'll take that outline. This, of course, is a right foot, and the Trachilos one is a left foot. So pop it over there. You can see the shape of the foot's really similar, but of course the toes are a bit out of whack. So just very roughly, I tried straightening the toes out, matching what we see in the other Trachilos footprints, and look, these are extremely similar feet.
Yeah.
And what's striking here, if you then compare it, here's the classic Laetoli foot, really different. And the classic Laetoli foot is much more human-like. So the new tracks represent a more primitive, more ape-like track makers. That's what the article also says. But we can note on top of that, that it's extremely similar to the Trachilos trackmaker, which of course tells us all sorts of things. Likely, for example, that the Laetoli trackmaker represents a rather old lineage, because the Trachilos prints are a good 2.5 million years older than the Laetoli prints.
Yeah.
And they're also in a different part of the world. That, is, we shouldn't put too heavy interpretation on that. I don't really want to get drawn into discussions about migrations this way and that. However, it would certainly appear to be the case that the Laetoli prints are, represent a very similar animal and thus rather an old lineage. All extremely interesting. If we then get to the question of why, let me put it this way. I shall put this in somewhat diplomatic terms. Are there scientific reasons why the Trachilos footprints are being ignored? No, there are not. There are other reasons, but they are not scientific. I think it would be wise not to say more about it than that.
I can agree with that. Yeah. I do feel like the prints at Laetoli and Trachilos are way too similar, and they both show, without a doubt, pre-hominin footprints.
Well, that's certainly my view of it. But in any case, whether that's correct or not, and science is always about hypotheses, but it must be possible to discuss the data. If the data cannot be compared and discussed, if you can't basically do this, then there's a problem, irrespective of whether or not you think that this is a correct conclusion. And there's something a bit funny when you viewers of this channel, and hi there everyone, I hope you're enjoying this, you realize that you're being offered something here that the readers of Nature are not. That's not really great. Anyhow, enough said.
Enough said. Thank you so much for answering the question and clarifying this for the viewers, because I do feel that the people who watched our video that we made in October and that they now read this Nature article, that I do feel like some of them definitely had some question marks, because we spoke about the oldest pre-hominin footprints. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you again in the future, I'm sure.
Yes, I hope so. Thank you very much for inviting me.
If you've seen me for a while, you know that I really dislike it when misinformation is being spread in any way, shape or form. And I do feel like the confusion that this article brought with it needed to be explained. And therefore I felt the need to create this video and to give Professor Ahlberg the option of explaining himself. The article in Nature that was published on Monday is leaving out a piece of the puzzle that we have uncovered, and therefore gives a skewed perspective of the human lineage. I do know that we will see Professor Ahlberg more on the channel in the future, not only because of the fact that he's really good at explaining things, but also because he does tremendous work. He's also working alongside my sister on projects, and I'm really interested in what the future holds. And thankfully, he doesn't mind a Zoom call with me and to be part of these videos for you guys. So that's awesome. And most of all, what really is very awesome, and I'm very happy with this, is that I will be meeting him in about a week. So yeah, I'm very excited for that. I do hope that there will be researchers that will look into both papers, both Trachilos footprints that were discovered in Greece and the Laetoli footprints that were discovered in Tanzania, and assess them in full. We need to be given the full picture when it comes to our history without any bias. And we need to be given the opportunity to have all the information collected, instead of information that is collected but then parts of other information that links to this being left out. I don't feel like that's the way that we need to work in the scientific community, which I'm not officially a part of, and that's probably for the best. But as you viewers of this channel know, is that I will always try to get to the bottom of things and give you the full picture and the entire puzzle with pieces that we currently know. I personally just love researching the ancient world, and I don't care if that is a footprint or a structure or a person or whatever. I mean, this is my passion, but I do want to give you the full picture, and I will never let bias become a thing. that holds me back from sharing certain information. But for now, we have to leave it here. I really want to thank Professor Ahlberg one more time because it was amazing that on such a short notice he wanted to make some time for me and do a Zoom meeting and explain things to you all. So yeah, definitely check out both papers in Nature, and who knows, maybe there will be more to this in the future. I put my globe on America, but it's such a small globe that I don't think anyone saw it. So like North America, South America, it's a stupid globe. I need a new one that's bigger. We've all suspected that humans arrived in the Americas much earlier than was long thought by the researchers and historians. The ancient footprints that are scattered along the dried up lake bed of Lake Otero in White Sands, New Mexico, have been confirmed by scientists to have been dated as the earliest known footprints in North America. This confirmation pushes back the timeline of humans arriving in North America that was believed to have happened around 13,000 years ago by at least 10,000 years, to the humans arriving by at least 23,000 years ago. Some footprints found here might even be 30,000 years old, which would push back the timeline by at least 20,000 years, although this is not yet confirmed. My name is Kaylee, and let's take a look into this latest archaeological discovery that will absolutely rewrite the history books. For a long time, there was a really big lake in New Mexico called Lake Otero. Back then, the climate was more wet and the area around the lake had a lot of vegetation, grasslands stretching for miles. This lush green area became the primary hunting grounds for fearsome predators like dire wolves and the American lion. They preyed on the plant eaters that grazed in the area of the Tularosa Basin. When the last ice age ended around 12,000 years ago, the lake started to evaporate. Rain and snowmelt carried dissolved gypsum from the mountain ranges surrounding the lake into the basin. The question one can ask is, how long have humans been living in the Tularosa Basin? And this latest discovered confirmation shows that humans have been inhabiting the area during the Ice Age's megafauna for a lot longer than we previously thought. For a long time, ghostly footprints would appear on the wet ground at White Sands, New Mexico, only for these prints to disappear once the ground dried out. For approximately 80 years, there was a small collection of fossilized footprints known to researchers, but a group of scientists discovered the dark spots along the dried up lake bed that appeared to be footprints. Scientists wouldn't be scientists if curiosity didn't get the better of them, so they decided to dig up these strange dark spots, better known as the ghostly footprints. This eventually led to the discovery of the paleo-human footprints and the Harlan's ground sloth. They also discovered footprints of a dire wolf with ancient seeds next to it. These seeds were dated to have been 18,000 years old. To research these ghost prints, a trench was dug into the brown gypsum soil. This is where there were footprints found below the surface at different depths. Above and below these footprints, the researchers discovered ancient grass seeds from a species of grass called Rupia cirosa, but more commonly known as ditch grass. The researchers then had these seeds analyzed using radiocarbon dating to figure out their age and the age of the footprints found near the seeds. The results of the radiocarbon dating calibrated dates between 22,860 and 21,130 years ago. This showed that these are the oldest known discovered footprints in North America. This study went a bit further. According to the research in the journal Science based on the walking speed and stature, it appeared that most of these footprints were from teenagers and children. This led to a hypothesis for a division of labor, where the adults would perform the skilled tasks like, for instance, hunting, and the teenagers and children would mostly do tasks like fetching and carrying things. The gathering parts of the hunter-gatherer lifestyle seem to have been carried out by the teenagers, with the children accompanying them. The children left most of the footprints in this area. This is a pattern commonly found in all excavated surfaces and depths at the Tularosa Basin. At White Sands, there are many remarkable tracks found scattered along the dried-out lake bed. Some of these tracks extend for long distances, and many of the footprints discovered here have found to have coexisted and interacted with the extinct Ice Age animals. In 2018, researchers discovered the footprints that they believe to have belonged to a female. These prints tell a story that is familiar to this day. Her footprints show her walking, but occasionally toddler footprints show up besides hers. The footprints of the female slipped in the mud and broadened at times, most likely from the additional weight of carrying the young child and changing the position in which she held the child. The last ice age ended, like I've discussed in my Doggerland video. This changed the Earth's climate, the onset and subsequent ending of the Younger Dryas, and the Earth became warmer and the rising of global sea levels. The once lush green grasslands with an abundance of vegetation began to disappear, and with it the great beasts of the Ice Age disappeared as well. These fossilized footprints at White Sands are currently the most important resources in the Americas when it comes to the understanding of the interactions between the humans and the extinct animals who coexisted there during the Ice Age. Fossilized footprints of animals living at White Sands more than 10,000 years ago are scattered along the dried-up lakebed, trackways and trample grounds from ancient camels and Columbian mammoths, for instance. The inhabitants of the Tularosa Basin during the Ice Age left very little to almost no proof of their existence. Some pieces of stone flakes from tool making, arrowheads and spear points have been found throughout the basin, although it seems that almost all of these belonged to inhabitants who lived there after the Ice Age had ended. This is in contrast with the surrounding areas that are filled with items left behind from ancient inhabitants. The dried-up lakebed of Lake Otero seems to be almost devoid of artifacts that date from before the Spanish explorations in the 1500s. Therefore, there's almost nothing left from the Ice Age as well, besides these fossilized footprints of animals and humans. These footprints, among other features found in the landscape, have further propelled the movement to redesignate the White Sands National Monuments into the White Sands National Park. It's a massive landscape that is filled with history stretching from the Ice Age to modern times, proving that this area is more than just a dried-out desert. To me, it shows that while we do think we know so much about the ancient world, we actually know very little, and we will keep making discoveries that will keep changing and rewriting the history books that we use today. But to me, that's also the beauty of history. It isn't stagnant, it's ever-changing, and as time goes on, we will keep uncovering more things, and we will change and broaden our understanding of the ancient world. Today a paper got published about the oldest footprints made by pre-humans. They were discovered near the village of Trachilos on the Greek island of Crete. These footprints were dated to be a little over 6 million years old. Around 50 track marks have been identified in a type of sedimentary rock that was formed near the shore of the ancient Mediterranean Sea. My name is Kaylee, and today I'm going to show you an exclusive interview that I had earlier today with one of the authors of this paper, Professor Ahlberg from the Uppsala University in Sweden. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Can you introduce yourself to the audience, who you are and what your role was in the paper that was released today about the oldest footprints of pre-humans in Crete?
Okay, thanks. So I'm Per Ahlberg. I'm the Professor of Evolutionary Organismal Biology at Uppsala University. What that means is really that, in my case, I study the evolution of vertebrates, of the backboned animals, from their earliest origins up to kind of the origin of humans, mostly by looking at fossils, but I also, to a degree, combine this with, for example, looking at developmental biology and genomics, at least in collaboration with people, to try to understand those sort of sides of evolution. So that's what I do generally. With this paper, I was the coordinating author, I think it's fair to say, not the discoverer of the actual footprints in the paper where they were first published in 2017.
Okay.
In this particular paper, most of the actual hard work has been done by Uwe Kircher and the other members of the Tübingen team. But of course, I've had a coordinating role and a role in writing the bits of the paper that are more specifically relating to what we make of the footprints themselves, as opposed to how old they are.
When was it made clear that these prints were 6.05 million years old? And what was your reaction when this date came out of the research?
All right. Well, I mean, the actual result, I can't remember exactly now, to be honest. I mean, it was made clear to me when Uwe wrote me an email to say, all right, well, we've got a date and this is how old they turn out to be. It was, like 10 months or a year ago, something like that. I was very pleased. Let me explain the background a little bit here. So what we claimed in 2017 is that we had this really important discovery of very early footprints of proto-humans, and not from Africa where you might expect them, but rather from Crete. Important thing to understand, by the way, nowadays Crete is an island, but it wasn't at that time. You're looking at a headland on the southern tip of the Balkans. Okay, so we're on the European mainland. But anyhow, now if you think about the claim I made in 2017, there are three legs to that. One is the locality. Well, I mean, we know the locality. The second is the identity of the track maker, and we made a good argument there. But then the third leg, of course, is, well, are they actually as old as we claim? And if any one of those falls down, then the whole story falls down.
Yes.
And we have come to realize in the years since 2017 that parts of our age determination weren't as robust as we thought they were. In essence, there were parts of it that were okay. I'll come back to that later because it relates to one of your other questions. But essentially, the data that we actually had would only allow us to say that they were between approximately 8 million and 3 million years old. And that's far too wide a time bracket. It's not terribly useful.
Yeah.
So Uwe and the rest of the dating team did a much more thorough and much more complex dating analysis, which has produced much more reliable results. Now the actual change in the headline figure is not very great. We had guessed 5.7. Here we have just over 6, call it 6.05. So you see that, almost a difference of 350,000 years. So sort of what about it? But this is a date that we can really trust.
Okay.
It's a much more secure date. And so the whole thing now feels much more solid.
Okay. And how were the footprints dated? Can you try to explain this in the simplest manner for people watching?
All right, I shall do my very best. It's actually not that horribly complicated. There are two major things that come in. We're looking here at the footprints, I should say, first of all, were made in a slightly muddy and slightly wet sand very close to the water's edge. Probably, if you imagine something like a small river delta, that kind of thing, we're right by the coast. And there are other layers both below this and above it where you get shells or clams and stuff. But in this particular layer, no. Here we're not in the shallows of the sea, we are in this little delta thing. Now, what the dating has relied on in both cases is things that are preserved in the sediment itself. But they're two completely different things. The first is, and this is something that we also did back in 2017, and we weren't wrong, but we didn't do it with kind of the accuracy that was needed, was that we were looking at little tiny shelly, kind of not quite millimeter-sized microfossils of a bunch of organisms called foraminifera. Now, what these are, you still get them in the seas today. They're like little sort of amoeba relatives with tiny little shells, quite decorative looking. The important thing about them from our purposes is that they evolved really rapidly, okay? They've been doing that for many millions of years. New species appear and other species die out, and they all look faintly different from each other. So and of course, the sequence of evolution and extinction has been mapped out quite well. There are people who spend their entire research careers doing this until they slowly go mad. But anyhow, but the point is, of course, that we can then take a rock sample, look at which foraminiferans are present, and say, okay, it suggests this age. So we had already done that in 2017, but this has now been done in a more sophisticated way, looking not just at presence, absence, but also at abundances. And another curious thing, some of these shells are often coiled like tiny little snails, and they can coil to the left or they can coil to the right. And you might have a particular species that persists for a long time, but at this point in time, the thing, for entirely unobvious reasons, flips from coiling to the left to coiling to the right, or vice versa. Okay, and so they've been looking at that as well, and so that narrows down the age band considerably.
Yeah.
The other thing that looked at requires a little more explanation, but it's really kind of interesting. The Earth, of course, is like a giant magnet, right? We have a magnetic field. This is why we can use compasses and stuff. But that magnetic field, which you might think is completely static, hello cat, is in fact flips from time to time.
Yeah.
Okay, so that you get a reversal of the entire magnetic field. In fact, there's a suggestion that we might be heading towards that right now because the magnetic field is weakening. But it's nothing to be terribly scared about. This has happened many, many times in the history of the Earth. But it means that, north kind of flips to south. Now, there are rocks that preserve a magnetic signal frozen in time. The classic example is like if you have volcanic lava pouring out of a volcano, it'll have little magnetic minerals in it which will align themselves like tiny compass needles with the Earth's magnetic field, and then the lava sets and they are stuck. So you can then take a sample of the rock and you can see what their alignment is, and you can determine, well, all sorts of things, but for one thing you can determine whether you're in a normal or a reversed magnetic polarity period. That's for like volcanic rocks, but it turns out you can sometimes also do this with sediments because you get bacteria living in the mud that produce little grains of the mineral magnetite, the iron mineral that aligns itself with the magnetic field. And when the rock hardens, the bacteria dies, these little needles are still there and gives you a magnetic field, although an extremely faint one, also for sedimentary rock. So this is what we did. So Uwe was spending a happy couple of days drilling repeated holes, of course, not just at the footprint level, but below it and above it. You can imagine through this whole sort of succession of rocks, taking very careful note of the orientation of the sample, because you can imagine that if you do this and then you come home and you don't realize you've forgotten which way around your rock sample was, then you're completely stuffed. The data is gone. But he carefully recorded the orientation of all these plugs of rock. Now, that in a way didn't show us anything exciting. All of them had normal magnetic polarity, but that in itself is important because you have in the relevant time window a period of normal magnetic polarity bookended by two periods of reversed, okay? And so you must be within that window.
Yes.
And these factors together allowed him to determine, well, him and his colleagues, to determine the age of the rocks. I want to add here that they also attempted a third thing, and he gave completely crazy results, but those results are themselves interesting in a slightly oblique way, as I'll explain. In volcanic lava and volcanic ash, you get a mineral called zircon. You may be familiar with it as a gemstone, in particular synthetic zircons are often used
zirconia.
Yeah, exactly, bingo. Well, natural zircons contain some radioactive minerals, radium usually, or that sort of thing, uranium perhaps, and this breaks down over time, and it's all trapped there in that little crystal, so you can analyze your crystal and you can see how old that crystal is. And it'll typically have formed at the time that the lava was hardening up. Now again, if you have a volcanic lava deposit or a volcanic ash or something, then you can get your zircon straight out of there, and that's grand. But zircons are very hard, hence the gemstone thing, and they tend to survive after the parent lava or whatever has been eroded away, and they become incorporated in things like sandstones or whatever, like beach sand. These are called detrital zircons. Now, if you think about this, what's going to happen here? So you'll have a sandstone is formed, now, let's say. The zircons in there may be very old.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, they could be worth looking at. So we sampled our sediment for detrital zircons. As it happens, of course, there are volcanoes, and have been for millions of years, volcanoes in this region. This is like, if you think about the eruption of Santorini that put an end to the civilization, that maybe the prototype for Atlantis. This is not far from Crete, and there were volcanoes in this sort of region earlier on too. So we were hoping that we might find some rather young zircons, because then the age of the youngest zircons would be the oldest possible date for the rock.
Yeah.
Obviously, it couldn't be older than the zircons that are in it.
Yes.
We found, however, that all the zircons were like hundreds of millions of years old. So no volcanic output in there at all. Of course, all this does not mean that humans originated hundreds of millions of years ago. Rather, it's telling us that the zircons are coming from very ancient sources. And that's where it becomes interesting, because it looks as though they are wind-blown and have come from north-central Africa.
Okay.
And likely that this sort of thing has been seen before. It is thought to be associated with the formation of the Sahara Desert.
Okay.
Because if you think of that, if you imagine that area all covered in forest and stuff, then nothing much is going to blow away from there. If it turns into desert and the wind is scouring, mountain ranges like the Ahlberg and whatever, then you're going to get wind-blown dust with maybe zircons.
Just like the Saharan dust that gets here in Europe sometimes in summer.
Exactly. I mean, exactly the same thing.
Yeah, because sometimes we have orange skies and we just know, oh, it's Sahara dust.
Yeah, exactly. So, fine orange dust in my car. I've seen this. Yeah, no, that's precisely what we're talking about.
Okay.
There will be tiny zircons in that dust if you trouble to look for them. So the zircons then did not give us a meaningful age at all, but they are interesting in terms of telling us what's going on in the global environment at the time.
Okay. How much do these footprints differ from modern humans, and how much do they differ from the apes of the time? So how did you establish that it's a pre-human and not an ape, but also not like human?
Yeah, no problem at all. I think at this point it might be useful for me to share an image. Here we go. All right. So this is most easily explained. By the way, can you see my little arrow moving here on the screen?
Yeah.
On the image. Okay, good. So this is most easily explained by showing you an actual footprint. So this is one of the best preserved prints from Trachilos. In essence, what you can say is that the front end of these feet is very human-like, and the back end isn't really.
Yeah.
And to contrast with apes, it has to be said we actually don't really have any ape footprints of this age, but we do have some ape foot skeletons, and they suggest that their feet look very much like the apes of today. Okay. The characteristic thing with an ape foot is, of course, that it looks very like a human hand.
Yes.
You've got the big toe set far down on the side and it's freely mobile, and the other toes are quite long and finger-like. And when you look at modern, gorillas and chimps, what have you, the footprints that they make are L-shaped or Y-shaped, if you like.
Yeah.
With this fork always showing rather clearly. So what's different here? That is the big toe. There.
Yes.
And here, although they are rather faint, you can see, I think, the impressions of the neighboring smaller toes. And this whole layout is like that in a human. You can see that the big toe is not set far down on the side. It's springing from the front edge of the sole of the foot. And here you have this rounded structure called a ball, just like that bulgy bit of the sole of your foot immediately behind the big toe. And you can in fact make out, I think, that the whole shape of the big toe is very like a human one, with this bit of a narrow neck and a sort of obliquely oval head up here. Yeah. So this region is very human-like. When you start moving down here, the whole thing becomes rapidly less human-like. If you think of a typical human footprint, it's rather long, the heel impression is deep, and unless you have fallen arches, there's a definite medial arch in the foot is. So you get a sort of concavity in the footprint here, right? And here we don't really have any of that. The sole is quite short.
Yeah.
The heel is kind of narrow, and there's no proper arch.
This print would suggest that they would be leaning more to like the front of the foot than us modern humans who lean a lot on the heel as well.
Yeah, I think there's a particular thing going on, or so I would guess anyhow. If you think about how we walk, we take these great long, rangy steps, and as your foot hits the ground, it's the heel that hits quite hard, but it's nice and cushioned and sanded, and then the foot sort of rolls forward and eventually springs off with the big toe. Now, the big toe push you probably got here because that's a big toe, but
the heel impression isn't there.
Yeah, it's not
like
the same. I might guess that an animal like this would walk a little more the way, what we would say in English, the way a toddler walks. In other words, a child aged maybe 2 or 3, how they can walk bipedally perfectly well, but they step flatly in this sort of way without that nice rolling gait that an adult human has. Yeah. So this is really rather different. Just to highlight another thing, you can see that this is kind of ridge sticking up here. And of course, this is not really properly reproducing the shape of the foot. What it is what we call a pull-up structure. It's basically that effect where you step in something sticky and your foot lifts and it pulls up the material. Showing that this was sort of fairly sticky, clayey sort of sand. And then the whole thing, it was presumably moist sand, but a dry day. The sun shone down, and by the time the next rains or whatever came along, all this had baked as hard as concrete, and this is why it's now preserved, right? So, but its capturing was really a moment on probably a dry, sunny day. The point is, if you look at where this pull-up is, it's not going up the middle of the foot, it's going up the outside edge, which is exactly where we put the weight on the foot when we step. So it looks like something of the dynamic of how a human foot works is already there. And you can also note that here, the kind of middle edge of the foot, the edge towards the other foot, is so faint that it hardly shows up at all, which again suggests is leaning a little bit on the outer edge of the foot, but it's not as developed as in us. So, of course, this really makes perfect sense for something that is, you've kind of taken what started out as a sort of generic ape foot, because if you took the back end of like a chimpanzee foot or a gorilla foot, it would look quite similar to this.
Yes.
But you've modified the front end. It's no longer hand-like, it's become foot-like from here forwards. Yeah. And then the rest of the evolution of the foot is about modifying the shape, making it longer, making the heel bigger, as the bipedal style of walking is perfected.
Yes. I do love this print.
Thank you.
It's a really, really good photo.
Yeah, it's really nice, isn't it? It's, you to capture these well, you have to wait for low light, typically late afternoon going into evening. You need the sun to be dragging obliquely across the sediment surface, then everything shows up.
Wow. So you have to photograph it at the perfect time for it to show.
Absolutely.
Perfectly.
Although we have a new technique now, which we in fact used for the first time on that project, with the result published in 2017. If you surface scan the rock instead, then we were using a laser scanner. Now there are optical scanners that just use kind of conventional light and are faster and more versatile. But anyhow, you can actually capture the 3-dimensionality. You don't get quite this resolution. I mean, if you look at the scale bar and you look at the sand grains, you can see that this photo has a resolution of maybe 1/10 of a millimeter, and you're a little hard pushed to get that with the scanner. We can maybe get 1/4 of a millimeter or so, but then you get the thing fully 3-dimensional, and you can light it exactly as you want and stuff. And it's very, very handy for studying footprints. So we're increasingly moving to using that.
Before I ask the next question, I just want to make sure that I'm going to say this name right. Ororin tugenensis?
That will be, you're doing a bit of a Dutch there. I mean, tugenensis, I would probably say.
Do these prints show that a European pre-human species was possibly living at the same time as the Ororin tugenensis, whose bones were discovered in Kenya?
Yes, I believe that is exactly what it shows. And it's interesting that they are of the same age. In Africa, as for viewers may know, there is a quite extensive fossil record of various early prehumans in Africa, of which the earliest two are Ororin from Kenya and a thing called Sahelanthropus from Chad. But about those, Sahelanthropus is likely a little bit older than Ororin. However, Sahelanthropus is actually slightly problematic. It's not entirely clear that it does belong to the human lineage. Now, that might seem like, well, how is that you can't tell? But if you think about it, our nearest relatives are the chimpanzees, right? And it's a reasonable guess. Obviously, eventually, if you follow these lineages back, you get to the same actual species. And as you will figure, in the very early part of the lineages, they're really not going to be that different. So if you have slightly crummy fossils, it might be very hard to tell which lineage, in fact, they belong to.
Yeah.
So Sahelanthropus is a little bit under a cloud in that respect. Ororin, however, is, I think, definitely a hominin, so it's a member of the human lineage. And what's more, although we don't have footprints of it, bits of the skeleton that are known, for example, the thigh bone, which is rather informative about posture, strongly suggests that it's bipedal.
Okay.
And it's living around, ballpark 6 million years ago. It has a little bit of a range, but, there it is. It coincides with, it covers the age of the Trachilos footprints. They are, of course, just a point in time. They're a single afternoon, but there we are. The thing with human footprints, I'd like here really to refer the listeners, if they'll remember this from maybe when they were kids, back to the story of Robinson Crusoe. There he is, all alone on his desert island, until one day when he finds a human footprint in the sand. And he is thunderstruck by this, because he realizes that other humans, and in fact they turn out to be cannibals, and it's all kind of scary stuff, are visiting his island. But the point is, of course, he doesn't stand there looking at it thinking, what the heck is that? Cow? The point is that the shape of the human foot is really unique. It's really unique actually among mammals. Nothing else has a foot that looks much like this. I mean, as I said, ape feet look like our hands, so that's fine. Yes, we're closely related, but they jolly well don't look like our feet. So when you have footprints like this, even though, of course, the only bit of the morphology of the animal that we get to see is, if you will, the underside of the foot, and we're lacking the other kind of 98.6% of the creature, nevertheless, this shape is so characteristic, and as far as we know, so unique to the hominin lineage, that I find it very difficult to make a case for this being something else. You kind of have to make something up that's just silly. There was another group of apes that we haven't heard of that also, evolved to look like this. And I mean, look, it's an anti-falsification patch, basically. So yes, I'd say that there's a very strong case. What, of course, is much harder to say is how this animal relates to Ororin, because we don't have foot bones of Ororin. Let's posit the possibility, could it be that this actually is Ororin? Are these Ororin prints? Is it just that animal was much more widely distributed than we now know? It's a rather obvious point that the fossils we've found, or the fossils that have been found, weren't, the only Ororins that ever lived.
Yeah.
Of course, they were more widely spread than that, and fossils tend to be rare things. It's perfectly possible that this, in fact, is Ororin, but we can't tell.
Yeah.
If you had really complete fossils of the feet of Ororin, then maybe that might be doable, or at least you could get closer to answering that question. But unfortunately, hands and feet are among the least frequently preserved bits of early humans. You really have to have very favorable preservation conditions. I mean, if you've fallen down a cave and died or something like that, then the prospects might be quite good. But anything that's a remote risk of, being scavenged, or bits being washed away in a river or something like that, hands and feet are going to be the first things to go. So our data set for these early humans with their feet is not great. Though interestingly, there is one form that does have well-preserved feet, and where we do have an interesting issue of comparison. Slightly later, I forget the exact date now, but it's 4 and a bit million years, and this time from Ethiopia, we have a species called Ardipithecus ramidus.
which was described some years ago. It's again, it's a if it is a hominin, and there's been some debate about that, it's a really primitive one. I mean, it would have looked kind of like a chimpanzee that you train to walk on its hind legs, you understand?
Okay.
Little head and all this sort of thing. It does have some definitely hominin-like traits, like small canine teeth, and the head seems to have been held upright on its neck rather than leaning forward, and so on. But the associated foot, which we believe on good grounds to belong to the animal, is a classic ape foot. It's not complete, but it's been described very nicely, and there's no reason to doubt that it is one of those feet.
Yeah.
And so this, of course, becomes interesting, because when Ardipithecus was described, the authors put forward the suggestion. I mean, they didn't put a lot of weight on this, but the suggestion was put forward that it could be a direct ancestor of later hominins like Australopithecus and ultimately ourselves, right? In other words, not just a member of our sort of lineage in the tree, but an actual member of the trunk itself leading straight on to us. But that I don't think can be true, because the thing is not only younger than Aurorin, but it's younger than our footprints, and our footprints were clearly made by a foot that is much more human-like than the foot of Ardipithecus ramidus. So that hypothesis then doesn't work.
Yes.
That's not to say, of course, that Ardipithecus is not a member of our lineage, but it would have to be a more basal line that's then persisted like a sort of side branch up to a later
and then
point
maybe
in time.
eventually branched back.
That wouldn't branch back. No, it would be a dead end side branch.
Okay.
Of course, we get a lot of that sort of thing. It's always look, the classic image of human evolution is that sequence of ape men that get gradually more upright. This, of course, is a dreadful way of looking at human evolution. It doesn't work like that. Not to mention all sort of side effects. Like if you look at these images and you see a color version, you see that the damn things get whiter as well as they, it's just, there are subtexts you just don't want. But above all, this, of course, is not how human evolution ever worked at all. It was a branching, bushy process, and there were all sorts of different proto-humans at various times. And it's often quite difficult to trace the lineage that's leading on to us, even when you can say that, well, clearly, we're all related to these guys. But exactly where does the ancestral line go? Very hard to say.
Yeah. What does the dating and this discovery of this footprint mean for the current human timeline? Does it change anything?
It doesn't change the timeline, given that this thing is, very much the same age as Aurorin. It actually has no impact on the timeline at all. It does have an impact on the biogeography, and that becomes interesting. In other words, where were things happening as opposed to when? One thing, by the way, that is very important to realize here, there is a lot of discussion when we're talking about human origins, about human origins in Africa. What must be understood is that two entirely separate events with very, very different time frames sometimes get accidentally bundled together in this discussion. Because first you have the origin of the entire human lineage, 6, 7, maybe 8 million years ago, the sort of time frame that we're talking about today. And then we have the origin of modern humans, of the order of about 300,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, the big thing here is that modern humans, without any doubt at all, originate in Africa.
Yeah.
That's absolutely clear. We can see it. That's what the fossils say. It is also what the genetic diversity of modern humans says, where you have by far the greatest genetic human diversity in Africa. And it's easy to see when you look at this, that kind of like all non-African humans, everyone from you and me to Polynesians to, South American Indians, all of us form one little side branch out of this African diversity. So that's, nothing to debate. But the question is, well, what about the entire lineage? And here things get a little bit interesting. If we start by looking at the modern apes, we will find that the two lineages of apes that are most closely related to us are first the chimpanzees and then the gorillas. Okay, and then further out you get the orangs and then gibbons, and then then you get to like monkeys and stuff. And obviously, gorillas and chimps live in Africa. And we have an early fossil record of humans, well, of early hominins, things like Aurorin and Australopithecus and whatever, and Ardipithecus in Africa as well. So it is, of course, quite natural to look at that and think, all right, so those branching points in the tree clearly happened in Africa. Now, they may have done. Certainly, that can't be ruled out. But there's one thing that we need to be aware of. If you look at the climate zones of today, you have the African sort of equatorial rainforest and, you know, somewhat more open forest environments, but all equatorial anyhow, where you get gorillas and chimpanzees.
Yeah.
And north of that, you have the Sahara, which is not great for apes, and then you get into Europe and it's much too cold. But we know that these branching points in the tree happened during a time period we call the Miocene. And the key node points, I would say ballpark between about 8 and maybe 20 million years back in time.
Okay.
During that time, the climate of the world was initially much warmer than today. There was no Sahara Desert, and that rainforest that's now, you'd find it in kind of, the Congo or wherever, certainly was there and extended right up to Vienna.
Okay.
So you have a very, very different sort of environment. And what we find at that time is that there's lots of fossils of apes from Europe. Interestingly, this is a period in time where the monkeys, although monkeys existed, they hadn't really got going in a big way. If you look around the tropical parts of the world today, there are loads of monkeys, and apes are rather kind of rare, rather low in diversity. Back then, it was quite the opposite way around. Okay. Lots of apes. The forests of Europe were like hooting and hollering with apes, many of which, in fact, seem to be fairly close to the node points of, the gorilla and chimpanzee branches. So we can see that the picture that we have today is, in fact, a relict distribution. The gorilla and chimpanzee-like apes have simply lost the entire northern 2/3 of their former home range.
Yeah.
And so if we ask the question, well, where did those lineages actually branch from each other? That's extremely hard to say. We may not be able to pin it down, but it could just as well have been in Bulgaria as in the Central African Republic. Just because all this stuff today is African, it doesn't really give us that signal, right?
Yeah.
So far so good. Now, obviously, what our footprint's telling us is that right at the end of that period, as the climate was already getting cooler and drier, there were early hominins, not only in East Africa, where we know we have them, but also in the southern Balkans. And one would presume then that, in fact, they extend between those two areas, presumably around the eastern end of the Mediterranean, so that in principle, at least, you could find their fossils in places like Turkey or Israel or Egypt, right? So good. That's what it definitely tells us. And strictly speaking, we can't go further than that. The place where the human and chimp lineages separated was presumably somewhere within that footprint. Okay. There is, however, one angle to this that might suggest that it's happening in Europe rather than in Africa. It's not conclusive, but it's an interesting argument, and it goes like this. It's generally accepted, I think everybody will be familiar with the idea that the emergence of humans and their acquisition of kind of humanness has to do, the whole sort of coming down from the trees bit, has to do with the climate becoming drier and rainforest giving way to savanna with just occasional trees. This is a really established idea, and no reason to doubt that this is essentially correct. What's less commonly considered is that process starts in the north. I said that old forest zone has been rolled back. Well, that's exactly what happens. And so the forest to savanna transition happens earlier in Greece, for example, or Bulgaria, than in Kenya.
Okay.
And that might be, and in fact, here we come back to those windblown zircon grains being interesting. It looks like we're in a dry time when these footprints are being made. The Sahara Desert has perhaps started to develop already. Now, even that, of course, isn't conclusive one way or another, but it suggests the possibility that perhaps the forest to savanna shift in one lineage of apes that then start to become hominins actually happen in this northern area where the climate change happened first, and then they spread southwards along with that type of environment. That would not be surprising. We see those sorts of effects with all sorts of other groups, like antelopes and whatever you want, at around this time or later in the fossil record.
That's really cool, because they would probably, the environment they're used to, they would follow.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Up north it would be too cold, and way further south it was still too warm, so they kept within that range of the environment perfect for them.
Yeah, exactly. The Goldilocks zone, as it were.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, just like...
This one's too cold, this one's too hot and wet, but this is just right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The footprints were published in a paper back in 2017. How come it took until now before we have this paper coming out? Did the research take that long, or were there other obstacles in the way?
There were some other obstacles in the way. Curiously, you might think, although this is, of course, I feel this is one of the most important papers I've worked on, it's actually not really my main line of work at all. Usually I work on very much older things. I study the early history of the backboned animals, the move from water to land, that kind of stuff. This is really a sideline for me. And as it happened, it's probably fair to say that one way or another, this project was a sideline for most of the people who were involved in it. And that, of course, sort of tends to delay things. But essentially, what happened was this. It is fair to say that the original discovery was not received with universal joy by the paleoanthropological research community, in other words, the people who work on human origins. Yeah. A lot of people are, I think, very wedded to the idea that Africa is the original home of the lineage, and so we got a lot of hostility.
Yeah.
The other thing, of course, is that not everybody who works in fossils works on fossil footprints. Fossil footprints can in fact be extremely informative, but if you don't really work with them, it's very easy to be a bit sort of dismissive and say, well, if you don't have a skeleton, you haven't got nothing. So suffice it to say that we were having a bit of a hard time first getting it published, and then we're getting a bit of a hard time with the response after it was published. I should add that at no point has anybody succeeded in actually showing that we're mistaken, or put forward a plausible alternative interpretation, but we were getting a lot of, oh no, it isn't. Anyhow, around the same time we published, or shortly before, I should say, another article came out describing a lower jaw of a possible early hominin called Gracopithecus from slightly older rocks, they're 7 and a bit million years, near Athens. And this is a paper from a team headed by a woman at Tübingen called Madeleine Böhme. And, so me and our colleagues on the 2017 paper were kind of looking at it saying, well, that's nice. And eventually thought, well, look, I'll try writing to them. At worst, I'll get my head bitten off, but maybe they'll actually be friendly. Well, it turned out that they were thoroughly friendly, indeed quite enthusiastic about our work. And they had also had a hard time getting their thing published, because apparently a lower jaw doesn't count either, So anyhow, so suffice it to say that we sort of, we sort of developed a bit of a friend relationship here, and we started talking about this back and forth. And eventually, because they said, well, we really like your work, but we suspect that your dating isn't as good as it could be. And then we said, well, why don't we do something about that? So eventually, it led to us making a joint visit to the locality to sample it for paleomagnetic data and foraminifera and all this sort of thing. And then Uwe and the other people on the dating team started working this material up, but of course everything takes time. And then the COVID pandemic came along, and we couldn't meet up as we had planned to do, and blah-de-blah-de. And this is basically why it's taken until now. So there's no more kind of sinister reason than that. But it took a while to get our act together. Yeah. But I'm very, very happy to have this paper out now. And we have, of course, also been thinking that it would be a good idea to explore the area further, see if we can find additional trackways that would give us more data about animals, or if we were really lucky, bones, but I think it would have to be extremely fortunate. More tracks is perhaps more realistic, because there's actually quite a lot of fossil footprints of different kinds of animals, in rocks of that age in this part of Crete. Quite a few localities are known, so obviously worth exploring further.
Yeah, you want to try to get more information, try to uncover more.
Absolutely, absolutely. Meanwhile, it is also worth mentioning that the Burma team have been conducting excavations for a number of years in Bulgaria.
Ooh.
And very interesting things are coming out of there. A few of them have already been published, but there's more stuff in the pipeline, so that's also something to look out for. And there you're talking about bones.
Ooh, that's very interesting. The future holds many things for us to learn still.
Certainly does.
Well, I'm really happy that you made time available for me to interview you.
Oh, no problem. If you just have a look at that, so this is one of the footprints, one of the nicer ones. Now, over the last few years, well, since I started working on these, crumbs 9 years ago now, I've shown photos of this and the other print to a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
To my colleagues here at work and to, friends and family members, to the cleaning staff when they come in, this sort of thing. The only people who have ever looked at these and said, that's not a human-like footprint, are paleoanthropologists.
Which is so strange, because it doesn't look like a foot.
Well, exactly. It's bloody obvious, isn't it?
It was lovely to be able to talk to one of the researchers and hear the information directly from the source. And if you want to build your own beast empire, claim territory, and collect over 100 species, including literal T-Rexes, go download Beastlord: The New Land and use code BL777. It's free, it's chaotic in the best. And with that said, you've reached the end of this exclusive video. I hope you enjoyed watching the talk I had with Professor Ahlberg earlier today. If you enjoyed watching, then don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to see more of these kind of videos, and click that bell icon if you want to be notified every time I upload. Because, like this video, I do sometimes suddenly upload. If you haven't watched my previous videos yet, then click the card in the upper right corner, click the links in the description down below, or click one of the videos in the end card. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you later this week in the next one. Bye! About 50 twack marks.